to be serious for a second right now. Hey, if anybody ever again sends you dust off, do not do it. I'm looking at your avatar being super serious right now.
You're not my real mom, I don't gotta listen to you. Yo, it's Radio Free with episode 270. This one, probably gonna be a quick one, because I was real busy this week. I'm doing the best I can, folks. However, this episode is still going to fit right into the Radio Free Innsmouth canon. Don't worry, because it's a continuation of something I began about a year ago with episode 222 about Buwal, or in English, Born Again. We're finally gonna be talking about some Korean metal. Now, if you've been watching or listening to Radio Free Innsmouth for a while, you've probably noticed a certain fondness for Korea to the point where I actually have Geo tattooed on the inside of my eyelids, and I eat so much pickled cabbage I actually defecate Greek yogurt.
It's funny. Yeah, that's joke. Oh, go inside and tell Mom that. Gotcha.
And these warm feelings extend to Korean metal music as well, particularly because it seems to be rather undernoticed by the international heavy metal community. Well, no more. We're fixing that. We're going to be going back to the 80s and the 90s, pretty much the root of all that is good about metal. But talking about 80s Korean metal in particular can be kind of tricky because there's a level of band member incestuousness, people being in like everybody else's band, that's roughly to the extent of 90s Swedish metal, which is really saying something. Like, you got the oldest Korean metal band, Sinaway. Their most famous vocalist, MJ Baum, went on to become a big pop star, but before that, he leaves Sinaway to sing for another band called Foreign Legion, and the bassist for that band, Park Moon-soo, used to be in a band called Chagunale. They had a vocalist named Kim Song-hun, who was in the other big old-school Korean metal band, Baekdusan, featuring the talents of guitarist Steve Do-kyun Kim, who went on to be in a band called Asiana that also had MJ Baum on vocals. Everything is really interconnected and really complicated, and I've had a hard time figuring out how to divide all these bands up to create some sort of narrative. To get around that problem, I decided to cover a band that didn't feature anybody else that was famous for being in some other band, or more like 5 other bands. So nothing with Shin Dae-chul, Kim Tae-won, or Kim Do-kyun in it. And that band is the delightfully bemonikered Armageddon. Despite the fact that this band doesn't feature a bunch of famous people that were in like 10 other historically significant bands, they still fit right in with the general story arc of the Korean metal scene. And that is because, like so many bands at the time, they were signed to Seorable Records, who I believe are still around today but not putting out any metal. But regardless, back in the late 80s and early 90s, these guys really had an ear for quality. They put out all sorts of great stuff, like the aforementioned Baekdusan, Chagunale, or in English, Small Sky, on the more progressive metal side of the equation, we have Stranger, and even future mega hit generators like Next.
Like, it's listenable, it's enjoyable, but it's like, I think other bands are better to listen to?
Okay, maybe that's a bad example. The Seorable years of Next are a little bit more along the lines of...
Came and listened to the music without just wanting to barf.
They actually got a lot better later on when they signed to Poibos.
Go!
But getting back on track with Seorable, they had The Club, they had Dionysus, and they had Asiana. Those last two are of particular importance because they feature in the heavy metal wall of fame created by Neil Tanaka, who you might recognize as that goofy-looking guy on all the Metal Lucifer album covers back from the Sabbath episode a couple weeks ago. Now, my man Neil is probably most famous for being a man of impeccable taste, as evidenced by his promulgation of Sab Rebels, Helen, and my personal favorite heavy metal army. But yeah, he's also got Asiana and Dionysus up there, and the band that we will be covering this week Armageddon. And if that isn't enough of a ringing endorsement for all bands involved, I don't really know what's wrong with you. Why you gotta go against the like that, but whatever. It's 2023. It takes all kinds.
That means you're gay.
So when Armageddon debuted, they were kind of riding the wave of a generalized trend within Korean heavy metal at the time, that being towards sort of a progressive power metal blend that also had a lot of thrash to it. Bands like Stranger, Sahara, and even Asiana at times were also involved in this. But Armageddon aren't doing your typical prog power either. The progressive element doesn't really come from really technical lead guitar or a whole lot of neoclassical flirtation. Instead, it has a lot more to do with the technicality of the rhythm guitar playing and the unorthodox nature of their songwriting, which is often very subtle and takes some unexpected turns. For instance, they'll start a song out, you think they're going to go with a standard sort of riff pair. They'll be like,
I have.
and then they're like,
I have a.
put them together like, and the average metal listener is like, all right, I get the general direction of this song. Meanwhile, Armageddon, being very sinister over in the corner there, lets you know.
No. You misunderstood.
That's not what I'm gonna do.
For starters, being that this is very progressive heavy metal, a lot of these songs got real weird, psychedelic, early Manila Road styled intros that I'm quite fond of before hitting that heavy-ass riff with the super technical rhythm guitar playing. I mean, obviously, you heard this like 3 times now.
Let me tell you a couple of 3 things.
You know it's catchy as fuck and that's dank as shit. What really becomes unexpected is where it goes next. Because just when it seems like they were building to a climax, they dramatically scale back the intensity. This music has a real sense of ebb and flow to it in a way that reminds me of the best of Tony Martin era Black Sabbath. And if you've listened to episode 143, you know I'm all about that. But don't you worry, it is going to get heavy again. But when it does, it's with a whole new set of riffs that are a perfect counterpoint to that intro pair of riffs. It's a really interesting way of writing a song. It's not standard progressive metal with all the sweep picking and odd time signatures, but in its own way, it's even more avant-garde. To have what seems like a simple heavy metal song at first reveal this complex narrative. The keyboards and heavy bass presence also give me major Tony Martin era Black Sabbath vibes. Again, a very good thing always. This right here is actually the chorus of the song, and yet it doesn't really appear until towards the end of the track's runtime. Very non-traditional songwriting, for a power metal band at least. What is more traditional is their inclusion of rocking solos, which again are always appreciated. I mean, it's supposed to be, you know, thrashy, groovy kind of power metal stuff. And like a lot of power metal bands, they can also slow stuff down for more epic tracks. But as you would expect, these two feature that non-traditional style of narrative. You got this epic, heavy Destroyer of Worlds riff starting the song off, and then they abruptly pull back for another one of those ebb and flow style segments, where the composition becomes led entirely by bass, drums, and vocals, with the guitarist sort of commenting over all of it with these little interjections, reintegrating the first couple notes of that opening riff every so often, before jumping into this rather ethereal sounding bridge with those rather complex palm-muted arpeggios building up to the chorus. And yeah, it's your standard big heavy metal chorus with the entire band providing backing vocals, and you think it's going to jump back into a verse riff after that, but instead it goes into this clever inversion of that bridge into the chorus riff with a suitably apocalyptic feeling at it. I mean, the band is called Armageddon, and the solo in this song starts out similarly very apocalyptic. It actually runs through a couple different styles, jumping from this rather tense style of tapping into a more expressive and expansive style of slow-burning melody that kind of jumps between technicality and melodicism. Even the more standard-sounding, fast speed metal songs in this album do a lot of weird stuff. I mean, I don't care who you are. That is a quality fucking fast speed metal riff with lots of little cool guitar tricks like that one you just heard licking together its various repetitions. Then when the vocals finally kick in, the song takes a turn for the atmospheric. The drum beat underneath all of it is still total speed metal hell, but the guitars are doing these weird ringing chords and odd little flourishes, kind of going back and forth with the vocals. The energy level increases when we start moving towards the pre-chorus section with this very intense, layered, melodic palm muted sequence that then pulls back expertly to reveal a classic mid to fast-paced heavy metal riff with the vocals jumping between thrash metal shout and power metal clear singing, and yet it ends on a rather dissonant note, indicating that the song is going to take a rather darker turn, which it does with this like very crunchy thrash metal riff that in turn leads into a more melancholic groove-based heavy metal section. So even the songs that you think would be a little bit more standard sounding in the speed metal shit, stuff still gets pretty weird. Now, every regional scene has its weakness. You know, with German power metal, you got the big, awesome choruses that turn into complete repetitive dreck when Homeboy decides to hold the mic out to the audience for the next 15 minutes.
Well, that just happened.
With early 90s Swedish death metal, you got those awesome groovy chainsaw riffs that occasionally get too groovy for their own good and just kind of turned into down-tuned hard rock instead of death metal. Dude, what's heavier than Pantera? With a lot of this early 90s, late 80s Korean progressive power metal stuff, the main weak point is that every band's got to have a couple of ballads. And this kind of jumps back to just generalized Korean metal from the classic period. Like Buwal, Born Again's biggest song was Hiya. And yet, if you've listened to episode 222 of this program about that band, you'll note I didn't play anything from that song. And there's a good reason for that.
Came and listened to the music without just wanting to barf.
It's because I fucking hate that song and I think it sucks. Armageddon also have a couple ballads on this album, but luckily for them, their wacky sense of songwriting actually ends up turning them into songs that I do not hate. In fact, I like them quite a bit. For starters, they tend to keep the guitars more distorted, and they add these really cool, like, atmospheric keyboards that even during a more major key song tend to lend everything a sense of mysticism and mystery. Again, very similar to Tony Martin era Black Sabbath in that regard. Also, Park Jin-so's vocals are still rough enough around the edges that even during the lighter moments, it doesn't get quite as sappy as a lot of the typical Korean metal ballads from this era. But most importantly, the guitars are still badass as you're hearing. It makes for an overall package that doesn't put me in a full-on kind of mood, which is always a positive in my book. Also, when it gets heavier, Homeboy starts busting out some falsettos. And while they might not be, technically perfect, again, they have a lot of soul and grit to them. And they fit very nicely with the very epic, romantic guitar riffs. Plus, even if you didn't like that, there's only like 2 ballads. The rest of the album is all just brutal power thrash shit. And that about does it for Armageddon. They did the one album. It initially only came out on vinyl and cassette. I believe it has since been reissued on CD. Probably costs $1 billion, but it's up on YouTube, so yeah, go listen to it. Hope you had a good time listening to this episode, and I'll see you next time. I told you it's gonna be a short one.
I'm not gonna lie, I had a huge diva fit when I couldn't order the double down, and I felt like a fool for doing it, but god damn it, the KFC double down is just that good.